What's going on, friends, family, and fellow hiker trash? My name is Matt Traver, and I am your host of this new series I'm calling Trail Talks. I've been so excited to get this project off the ground and kind of kickstart a little podcast ever since I've started all of my traveling and adventure sports and hobbies since discharging from the military almost a full year ago, which is unreal to think about. And I've had so many questions and from my friends and other people I've met on trail that hit me up either on social media, like Instagram or Facebook, and they've been asking me questions about gear and places to go and things that I love to do. And so I'm finally bringing it to you guys in podcast form. In the first attempt I'm going to have, I want to talk about a topic that I actually came across reading in Climbing Magazine. I thought it was really cool, really interesting, and it deals with the moral and ethical challenges being faced by the climbing industry on Mount Everest. There's a lot of accidents happening there, and they're not doing anything to stop it, and it definitely can be prevented. So stay tuned. That's what we're going to cover here next on Trail Talks. All right, guys, welcome back. It is Matt Traver here with Trail Talks, kicking off today's episode with the first topic that I found very interesting, Mount Everest. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the comments open below, or you guys can shoot me a DM from whatever social media platform you follow me on. But I'm curious to know, what comes to mind when you hear the words Mount Everest? I think for a lot of people, it automatically draws their attention to the massive Himalayan peak, right? Which makes sense. To put it in perspective, Mount Everest stands 29,032 feet in elevation. That is actually only 2,000 to 3,000 feet shorter than the average cruising altitude of your standard airline. That's insane to me because you have people climbing this mountain with nothing more than basic hand tools, fixed ropes, and some oxygen tanks. That's awesome to me. Which I think is a great segue into the next point, that I think Mount Everest is also synonymous with a lot of insurmountable odds and challenges, right? I think we all tend to have our own personal Everest or our own insurmountable challenge that we're facing in life. But for some people, especially in the climbing community, it actually is Mount Everest. And I think this allure is what draws so many people, especially inexperienced climbers, who think they have what it takes to cross this insurmountable feat off their bucket list to try and tackle this mountain just because they have the money and the ability to pay for the gear. So, what's the problem, right? The issue is the government of Nepal does little to regulate the permits of inexperienced climbers coming, and no matter who you are, you need the help of the local people known as the Sherpas. And these people are dying at a rapid rate, including the inexperienced climbers, right? And it seems like there's little to nothing that anybody can do to stop this massive commercialization effort. And because of this push for the commercialization of Everest, Sherpas are often exploited and taken for granted by these pompous Western climbers who believe that they can simply just walk them to the top. And according to a research statistic by a man named Krishnadev Kalmore, who studied the Sherpa people and their cultural influence in the region, he determined that there are about 150,000 of them right now, and they are renowned for their climbing skills and superior strength at high altitude. And this is mainly due in part to their natural acclimatization to the region growing up there. Their bodies have literally biologically adapted to this high altitude. And so it makes them key players in this mission to get people to the top of this mountain. Now, often the top guides in the industry will keep coming back season after season, despite the risk to themselves and their health, in order to pay off, student loans for their kids or to support their families, because Sherpas are often brought up in very impoverished parts of Nepal, particularly the nation or city of Kathmandu. That's where most climbers go through in order to make it to base camp. Now, these incidents that occur on Everest are killing these Sherpa people because it takes a lot of strength and effort and logistical planning to make a climb happen. And a lot of times these climbers from the West, be it Europe or the United States, expect that these Sherpas can just do it for them. They pay and they guide them to the top. Well, that's just simply not the case. See, what tends to happen on Mount Everest as well is when you get to a certain point above 8,000 meters, you reach an area known as the death zone. And a lot of the traffic and foot movement on Mount Everest is heavily dictated by the weather. And oftentimes there are small windows of opportunity that only peak for a few days in this climbing season that many different industries are competing for. Now, when you have a lot of climbers competing for a summit push in just a few days, these things called queues tend to form. A queue is basically a line. Like, think of being in line at Disney World and you're there for hours and hours and hours, and it's super hot and your ice cream cone's melting and you're having a horrible time. The kid next to you is crying, everyone's sad, and you just want to go home, right? It's far more perilous for these climbers on Mount Everest, right? Queues are these very dangerous situations that have very lethal consequences at altitude, because when you reach the death zone, your body is literally depleting itself of oxygen stores, and it quite literally is killing you as you are taking every brutal step up these snow-covered peaks. And so, even with supplemental oxygen, the exertion that puts on the human body, it starts killing you. And the more and more people that attempt to climb in this limited window, the more and more deaths they see happen from these queues, because inexperienced climbers are waiting at these high altitudes for longer durations of time. And the Sherpas are forced to stay with their clients. And so if their clients don't have the technical skill or proficiency to make it out of these situations, the Sherpas are forced by their contract to remain with their clients. And oftentimes the Sherpas are loyal to their clients and will die along inexperienced climbers. As an estimate right now, since 2010, there's approximately 300 undiscovered, what's the word I'm looking for? Unrecovered bodies that are just up on Everest right now. And climbers often tend to pass them when they're making their summit attempts. And so it's a very tragic and dangerous situation that's occurring up there. And unfortunately, the only people who have to continue going back up in this area are the Sherpas, because most climbers, they make their summit attempt, and if they're successful, they're happy. And if they are not, they're may come back, but usually with the cost of expenses, they typically don't come back for a second season. Now, this growing issue has gained a lot of attention in the media and in the industry, and especially from mountaineering expedition consultants, to include a man named Alan Arnett, who gave an interview during this story that was being covered, and it was produced, called The Inside Story of Mount Everest's Deadliest Climbing Season, where he said, quote, "When I saw this emerging situation, I wrote on my blog that we have a potential disaster in development, that we have this many people, this short of time, at the end of the climbing season, and the number of inexperienced climbers and unqualified guides. It's the perfect storm," end quote. This has been getting a lot of traction, especially because climbers in today's community get their inspiration from the media. And oftentimes these Himalayan peaks mesmerize climbers from, social media posts or top tier A-list movies like Everest with Jake Gyllenhaal in it. And experts agree that it's starting to accumulate a new breed or generation of would-be climbers. And a lot of these people think that just because they can pay for high-quality gear, that they have the skills necessary to do it. Experts agree from different places like National Geographic and Climbing Magazine that high-quality mountaineering gear is fundamental to a successful trek, and that advances in these materials absolutely improve climbers' survivability through these harsh, erratic environments. But they also believe that over the past couple decades, it's proven that gear does not make the climber. And so one of the issues that Everest is having are these hordes of people coming, shelling out cash for these services, and they show up and realize they have no experience and have no idea what they're doing, and they have to lean on the experience of the Sherpa guides, hence the perpetual loop of the problem. And so to summarize everything and kind of bring it all together, you have Mount Everest, which is this incredibly captivating mountain that offers a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to achieve a challenge in life. And popular media that's spreading this message of, you can do it, here's the gear, this will make you better, marketing these things that almost seems to be in place of skill. And then you have people who live in the local region of this mountain who have the ability and the skill and the experience to get people up there. And then, to just put the cherry on top of this, you have industries that capitalize on those three individual modules and try to commercialize it. So, despite all of the risk and all these things happening, the question of what can be done remains. How can the mountaineering industry really contain this growing threat and hopefully mitigate risk to the industry and inexperienced climbers, and especially the local Nepalese Sherpas? And unfortunately, the responsibility is ultimately falling on two demographics of people, and that's the mountaineering community and the Nepalese government. And the government really has not done a fantastic job of upholding any end of their bargain. Only minor changes, if they can even be classified as that, have occurred when the government kind of introduced these new number of measures that ostensibly improve the safety of climbing. And these things include that foreign climbers can't be allowed to tackle Everest solo, which, that doesn't happen anyway. Blind and double amputee climbers would no longer be allowed to climb, kind of for obvious reasons, if you ask me. And the medical certificates of prospective climbers have to be thoroughly checked to ensure their fitness. That one's actually pretty good. I think that one kind of does the best job of mitigating potential risk, but it still is not stopping this flood of inexperienced climbers from applying. If they don't have any underlying medical conditions, they can still go ahead and put in for it, even if they have zero climbing experience. So unfortunately, this asymmetrical level of responsibility favors the mountaineering community. I think the best way to round out this podcast would be to kind of talk about a projected solution or a plausible solution that is kind of in the works right now, and that is the Mountain Worker Initiative. And it's currently being implemented by the International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation. And now, according to another correspondent from Climbing Magazine, Owen Clark, the Mountain Worker Initiative has been launched with the aim of establishing, disseminating, and supporting guidelines for ethical trekking and mountaineering practices worldwide, and with a focus on the lives of the mountain workers. And it will begin a rollout of guideline principles that will later follow a collaborative effort at Everest and throughout Nepal within the Nepali Mountaineering Association and the Trekking Agencies Association of Nepal. In addition to the Mountain Worker Initiative, the mountaineering community simply needs to shift its focus onto peer accountability and restrict the flow of permits being issued to climbers who have little to no real-world experience. It seems like a no-brainer, but those in charge of funding and marketing these guided expeditions need to formally test their clients in a practical application of skills to ensure that a safe and symmetrical burden of safety and responsibility is shared on the mountain. If patterns continue as they have and inexperienced climbers pursue this pretentious reputation by scaling the world's tallest peak like this, more Sherpas are going to pass away along with inexperienced climbers. Now, the International Climbing and Mountaineering Federation is receiving donations for this initiative, and it will continue to pursue ethical climbing guidelines to protect the Nepalese people. If you want to show your support, feel free to donate at theuiaa.org/mountainworkerinitiative, and by lending a donation or voicing your suggestions to help the community grow and thrive safely. Well, guys, that's it. That's the first episode of Trail Talks. I've been your host, Matt Traver, and this has been an honor to bring my little dream of having a podcast to life and have you guys sharing it with me. This monologue was brought to you simply to, one, fulfill a project for school, but two, to kind of experiment and get a feel for the platform and how I feel talking on a podcast, and, kind of get feedback from you guys and see if it's well received, if you want to see more content, if you guys want to see things like gear reviews or trip suggestions. I've traveled all over the place and I don't have any intention of stopping. And it's kind of funny, I actually had to stop this podcast halfway through my recording session in order to take a phone call from one of the members of my small mountaineering team. That we had to go over some stuff for a plan I have coming up in less than 5 weeks. We're going out to the Pacific Northwest to conquer a couple mountains, and I could not be more excited for that. So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. If you have any comments for me, please leave them. And until next time, I've been your host, Matt Traver, and this has been Trail Talks.